Okay, you may begin. It's now live.
So is Doug Lecklider on? No, he's not on yet.
I mean, I do
One of our
see his
codes.
name, but someone else is there. Not
Oh,
I just spoke to Doug, and he and I are having some internet difficulties here for some reason. So I don't know, Laurie, maybe you might want to give it just a couple more minutes here. I did get mine to come up, but he and I both were struggling here. I don't know whether, I don't know what the deal is.
totally.
So perhaps, I'm sorry. I was going to say perhaps Leslie could greet our public as we generally do at the beginning and tell them about, chat, et cetera, and so forth while we're waiting.
Sure, of course. So welcome to the last scheduled Farm Solar Working Group meeting. That does not mean that this will be the last one. We will find out today. However, thank you so much for coming on. It looks like Doug, the co-chair, is also joining at this moment. Hello, Doug. So we will have the chat function available, so feel free to put your comments into the chat. We will definitely be monitoring that post the working group here. And then we have a very dense agenda, but it is a short agenda, which I believe we have a couple of farmers that would like to speak, and then we're going to be discussing amendments that this working group has been working on behind the scenes. So Doug, can I hand it over to you and see if I missed anything? I don't know if he can hear me.
Doug, you're on mute. You're on mute, Doug.
Yep.
Hello, we can hear you now.
Hi, everything I do is backwards tonight, but I want to thank everybody for being here, and not just the 8 members, but there's been a lot of public participation, which is part of the reason this is going on, so that the public did feel like they could participate in these trying times. And we'd like to jump right into the agenda. And the first thing we'd like to do, we have a guest tonight. I'd like to introduce Tanya Spandler, and she is the first item on the agenda. She's a farmer in the reserve, and please give us your thoughts on agriculture in the reserve and solar panels.
You're on mute, Tanya.
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving me this time to participate in this discussion. My name is Tanya Spandler. I'm a small-scale producer and owner of Passion to Seed Gardening, situated in the Ag Reserve. I lease about 3 acres from a family farm, which I'm actively farming on. And I've been farming on this piece of land for the past 5 years. And happy to share that each and every year that over the past 5 years, it's been a whirlwind learning curve with cumulative knowledge of beneficial experiences for my own personal growth as a new farmer. I produce a variety of ethnic vegetables to cater for my wide spectrum of customers. I've witnessed a lot of interest and enthusiasm over the last few years from prospective customers from out of state, and that has really encouraged and gave me the motivation to expand my production capacity. With so much food insecurity going on as a result of this pandemic, I recently signed up to participate with Farm to Food Bank program, and I'm looking forward to supply some fresh produce to this program in the coming season of 2021. It's my hope and intention to contribute in a small but positive way as a beneficiary of farming in the Ag Reserve. I'm very grateful and appreciative to be a resident of this county that recognizes the value of its food producers. We all collectively as farmers, both small and commodity producers, face challenges and concerns, but we have faith and optimism that those in authority and those that have the decision-making powers allow differing opinions to be resolved amicably to the benefit of all. And so it is against this background that I would like to share some prepared notes from a farmer's perspective with regards to this ZTA project. So as producers of food and fiber, Montgomery County farmers have worked for 40 years to steward the agricultural reserve. Next generation producers from long-standing family farm and new diverse producers are asked to be heard. We offer some thoughts on our decision-making as we drafted potential amendments to the zoning text amendment 2001. The key to the reserve's success originally was willingness of many farmers to sell development rights and grant easements in perpetuity to restrict the land for agricultural uses. In return, the county gave its promise to protect the land for agriculture. That promise has been tested through the years as it is now with proposed zoning change. Today, we are a national model for farmland preservation, and our farming and forestry practices protect watersheds, sequester carbon, and help the clean air. In addition to the reserve's importance as a source of local food and fiber, its economic value and its contribution to environmental quality, tourism, magnificent vistas, historic farmsteads and villages are an unmatched cultural and recreational resource. Unfortunately, so much land so close is hard for folks with little understanding of farming to resist tinkering with it. The watchwords have been adhere to the master plan, do no harm, and think before acting. Over 40 years, we have had to address notions from offices distant from the combine and field that would make our job more challenging. Today's threat, like the others before it is made with good intention of finding a better use for farms than farming. But like sprawling development, the outer beltway and huge private institutional facilities, it is not consistent with the master plan and the purpose clause of the agricultural reserve zone. Both designate agriculture as the primary land use in the reserve. Contrary to that purpose, this text amendment makes the solar installations, it contemplates the primary land use. The ZTA is a de facto zoning change. It is being made without going through the master plan amendment or rezoning process. It is an abusive process that makes a major land use change without full public scrutiny. We believe it is inconsistent with the master's plan policies, the purpose of the agricultural zone, the basic concept of the reserve, and the promise of the county to protect it for agriculture. The solar installations contemplated by this ZTA are industrial in character. They are not necessary uses. They are not as accessory uses. 180 or more of them randomly scattered across the reserve will affect agriculture. And I believe we collectively as farmers, we are sure of that. Thank you so much for letting me share our thoughts as collectively as farmers in perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would bring your attention to there's some other notes in the select testimony from some other young farmers in the reserve due to time, where certainly would encourage anyone to go and read those. But let's, I think at this point we should move right into our second agenda item. which is amendments. So Caroline?
I'm wondering if it would be all right if I offer a preamble to the offered amendments that have been sent to the group and entered into the Google Drive that were from the agricultural and preservation group members.
Yes, if it's part of the amendments, let's move on and do it quickly.
I don't mean to interrupt, but if people cannot hear me, you need to let me know. I think we're all finding a little snow ice challenges out here. So if you can hear me, I'll proceed.
You're good right now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this is we have amendments that will follow that we're offering. Again, if commercial solar facilities are to be allowed in the agricultural reserve, they must be conditional uses like other utilities and installations that are not accessory to individual farms, such as airstrips, veterinary hospital, broadcast towers, above ground pipelines, lines, and notably public utility structures. That would ensure appropriate scrutiny before a hearing examiner to ensure master plan consistency and compatibility with nearby uses. Second, the ZTA was initially promoted as providing for community solar systems because community systems have local subscribers, and thus the power they generate is credited to helping meet a locality's affordable green energy goals. If adopted, the ZTA must require that any installations be community systems with county residents as subscribers. Otherwise, the ZTA is a bait and switch, serving no local purpose other than barely affecting the mix of power sources of the regional grid. And third, there is no scientific or sound policy basis for permitting 1,800 undesignated acres of the reserve for 2 megawatt solar systems. If they are to be allowed, they should be approached as a pilot program because neither the sponsors nor anyone else knows what the effect they may have. Fourth, it is vital to protect the reserve's forests, slopes, and its better soils for farming and to protect water and air quality. We have specific suggestions to that end. Finally, we support solar energy as an accessory use on farms. We favor increasing the energy production of accessory solar from 120 to 200% of the on-site use. That could supplement farm income as opposed to presenting further challenges to farm businesses and will encourage all farms to become energy self-sufficient. It is also worth noting that our proposed amendments fulfill the goals supported by residents in a recently conducted and released opinion poll. First, they address climate change mitigation and adaptation. Second, they provide for affordable renewable energy for county residents. And third, they allow for farmers to put solar on their farms up to 2 megawatts. Thank you.
Okay, let's move right along then with possible amendments. Do you have some amendments that you would like to put on the table?
Lauren has that.
Yeah, I do.
I have some, Doug.
Okay. Let's get through these quickly as we can. Lauren, put yours on the table and then we'll go to Doug Boucher.
Okay, this is after discussing the, this is a collective group of amendments through the farming community here in the Ag Reserve. So first, any solar system that is not an accessory use as defined in the current zoning code should be a conditional use. Any solar system in the Ag Reserve that is not an accessory use to farm should be consistent with the AROS plan. That's the Ag Reserve Open Space, otherwise known as the master plan, and the intent statement of the AR zone, which makes agriculture the primary land use. That requires the following conditions. Any non-accessory solar collection system producing more than 200% of on-site use must be conditional use. A, because by definition, it is neither the primary use of the land nor accessory to a farm or home, or even designed primarily to serve the residents of the reserve. B, the amount of land required to generate 2 megawatts, 8 to 10 acres, maybe 15, requires specific attention to its impact of the specific project on neighboring properties rather than general regulations appropriate for limited uses. B, large-scale solar collection systems in the Ag Reserve must specifically be for community systems only with subscribers that live in the county. The only rationale for using land in the reserve is to help meet the county's clean energy goals. And the proposal was put forward as community solar and should not be a bait and switch exercise. Community solar that meets the goals of our county to reduce our carbon emissions. C, we believe class 1 and 2 soils should be excluded from use for solar installations that are not accessory to farms. These soils should be reserved for productive agricultural uses. D, we believe the removal of forests to install solar installations should be prohibited without exception and clearly stated, not something that could be bargained for. E, we support the 3 options for co-location of solar with agrivoltaic farming that are currently in the ZTA. So we support that these projects either support pollinator habitat, grazing animals, or crops, as long as class 2 soils are excluded. We are in favor of that. And we believe slopes greater than 8% should be excluded from solar installations to prevent soil erosion. And finally, because energy technology is rapidly evolving and there is no scientific justification for preempting 1,800 acres of the reserve for solar installations, which could result in as many as 180 to 200 of them in the reserve, the use of community systems should be pursued as a pilot program with a maximum of 5 solar installations a year for 5 years from the approval of the ZTA, with evaluation by Park and Planning in conjunction with the Office of Agriculture in a report to the County Council, including the number of site plans approved, the impact on the reserve, and effect on the county's energy goals in context of solar installations and usage throughout the county. That last item, I'll just mention that we just received recent research that was released by NREL that shows that there are enough rooftops in the country to provide all the solar that all the homes in the country need. And that's new for them. That was not something they were saying before. And it just shows that the first statement there is important to recognize that energy technology is rapidly evolving and it needs to be reevaluated after a few years of implementation. So that's it for our amendments that we're proposing. Any questions or discussion on those?
Yes, yes,
Can
Doug.
I ask the co-chairs a question about process?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether this is, a series of several amendments, A through H. If it's a single amendment, by all means, let's discuss it as a whole, vote on it, and then go on to other amendments. If, on the other hand, this is
I didn't hear that.
we discuss the first one, then take one. Yeah, I'm asking whether this is a single amendment with a large number of points, or whether it is several amendments numbered A through H. If it's a single amendment, let's go ahead, discuss it, and vote on it. About a dozen amendments, I would ask that we take the first one from this list, discuss it and vote on it, then take the first one from my list, discuss it and vote on it, and alternate back and forth.
I would defer to the group as to what they think will.
So could you do amendment or several?
Sorry.
I think I'm gonna ask for some guidance from the group. Do we want to handle these? Well, I guess Lauren maybe should answer this first. What's your preference? Do you wish to put this on the table for a vote as one item, or do we go down the list, or what's your
I
preference?
think we need to go down the list, from each one and discuss them. And just, we can clarify if we need to. I also think that there are things that if the group says we don't like that, then we need to discuss how to get to a point where we do all feel comfortable with one item or the next.
Leslie, do you have a comment?
I'm fine with that process.
Okay.
Doug?
Yes.
I have just a short comment.
If it is the case.
I don't have any problems.
Amendments.
Lost.
I think you have to fix your audio again.
Okay, is it me or is it Doug?
It's Doug.
Okay, for me, I don't care how we do this. I don't, even some of the other ones that have been put in there, I don't think they're in a form that fits anything that's gonna be of the vision that the council's gonna see, or even for that matter, if it goes back to committee. And so, I don't know, we can discuss them if you want to, but I imagine somebody else is gonna have to legalize it or something.
True, if I can just jump in on there.
Yes,
Once
Tom.
the group votes on amendments, and if there are majority consensus amendments, council staff will put those into the correct legal format. So you don't necessarily need to worry about that part. This group.
Will this group have a chance to re-see that?
Of course, yes. There's just, I don't think you need to, for the process here, I don't think you need to wordsmith exactly what the amendment would be right now. You guys agree on a concept, and then we show you what that concept would be in legislative language, and you say, that's right, that's good, or not so good, or really bad. And then we redraft.
All right. That's
May
helpful.
I ask you a clarifying question as well? So if we have some
So,
recommendations.
Could we
that-
clarify what order we're going to do these?
Hold on, Doug. So Tommy, may I ask you some clarifying questions? So if we have recommendations that go beyond the scope of the ZTA, we can still include that into something and then say, this is what is needed in order for this group to come to a majority consensus, even if it's out of the scope of the ZTA. Is that correct?
Correct. You guys.
And we are not on the
You guys can
hook.
make recommendations that are related to the ZTA, but require changes to other parts of the code that are not specifically in the zoning ordinance. And if you'd like to make recommendations on that, that is, in my view, well within your purview.
And we will also not be on the hook of coming up with the legal language, as
No.
you just said.
No, we have Jeff here. Jeff's the council staff person. So Jeff is with us. He could respond and help with
Yeah.
all of that.
And if there's, just because we're speaking about zoning in the ZTA, but if there is other legislative changes such as tax code, there's going to be another attorney that's drafting that. But again, that's, you guys should feel free to make recommendations on that. And then we'll show you what that looks like, and then you can say, yes, that's consistent with what we discussed and agreed to at the work group meeting.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. I'm sorry, Doug. Butcher, what were you trying to say? Doug B?
Yeah, just to do one from each list in order. In other words, Lauren's first one, then my first one, then Lauren's second one, then my second one, etc.
Are you prepared to present yours?
Yes, I am. I think you've all seen it in the list, but I can certainly go over them.
Doug L., I defer to you.
Me?
Yep.
I think maybe we should just be clear on what sets of amendments we're talking about, because I understand that the Ag and Preservation folks just went through that set that they had sent around a little earlier. And there is another set that was developed that tries to draw on some of the different points that were covered in both in the chat and in our previous discussions and so on. There's sort of some recommendations coming from, the solar and environment side. And then Doug has some additional ones that he's added. So I think we just need to figure out what's going to be on the table. And I think that it was great that Caroline made that introductory sort of overview statement. And I think that that might be a good thing for folks that are putting amendments on the table, if they are, what we're trying to accomplish. I think that was
Just to help you move along a little bit, I think Doug L. asked Lauren how she wanted to handle it. And I thought Lauren already said she wants to go through each one. So I
thought
that's what
she
she
said.
said. So that's how I think you're going to proceed.
I thought you said Al, sorry. Did she say that?
Lauren.
Lauren, would you present I guess we'll go to your first.
The question is, are we going to do all of hers?
Yes, I think so. All of hers.
I think to make this thing flow at all, we need to just get through hers and then we'll go right to yours, Doug, and keep moving. So
okay,
we're going to break these down. Lauren, I'm going to ask you to kick the first one out there again, and let's see where it goes.
Okay, all right. So I guess the first one is really any non-accessory solar collection system producing more than 200% of on-site use must be conditional use. And the rationale is because by definition, it's neither the primary use of the land nor accessory to farm or home, or even designed primarily to serve residents of the reserve. And the amount of land required to generate that 2 megawatts requires specific attention to its impact of the impact of the specific project on neighboring properties, rather than general regulations appropriate for limited use. So depending on the site and the location, there may be different conditions that need to apply for the neighbors, for roads, for site. Anyway.
All right. I think in layman's terms, this would mean, as you've seen many times, it would have to go through a process and the neighbors would have a chance for input. And I see Jeffrey shaking his head. So I think that's a very simple explanation of what that is, if I'm correct.
It is correct. It's a process that goes through approval by the hearing examiner first, If there's any objection to the hearing examiner, it goes to the Board of Appeals, but it's a quasi judicial public hearing.
It should be noted that in case anyone feels that this is an opportunity for people to just come in and wave their arms and say, we don't want solar next to us, by virtue of allowing it as a conditional use, there are certain what they call inherent effects of the use that are acceptable, that cannot be challenged. However, there may be non-inherent effects that the hearing examiner would look at, that the community could bring forward. As an example, what if a larger group of solar arrays were being proposed by a historic site of great importance, that its view shed would be directly from that particular historic site. This is just an example. Or what if it was in an area that was directly next to a agritourism location, brewery, whose livelihood depended on the visitor aspect of it. Those are things that could be brought forward now that the hearing examiner may decide that they don't rise to the level of a non-inherent effect, and the project would be approved. It has to really rise to the level of some effect that is above and beyond the normal occurrence of a solar array installation. So I'm just trying to make sure you understand it. Isn't it as if someone comes say, I just don't want solar in my neighborhood? That could not happen in the process.
Okay, is there any further discussion on the first item? If not, I will call for a vote. Al?
Yeah, and I'd also ask the folks that are doing the solar development to comment on this. I mean, again, I have experience from working with multiple counties on community solar development. And this is not, for example, Prince George's, where community solar is not just functioning right now, but actually some of us in Montgomery County, actually many of us that are subscribed to those programs live in Montgomery County. But this is not a conditional use generally. It is not widely considered in the implementation of the state's community solar program to be a conditional use.
Right, that's in areas that are not master plan designated as farm and open space. So we're trying to get this in an area that has a designation that is legally binding, and we're trying to get some solar in there also, but do it in a way that will not undermine the agriculture of the community. So conditional use would be a way to get to that. And we would be comfortable with that.
Well, I know, can I just, yeah, thanks, Lauren.
Examples. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll go to you, Al. I just wanted to say in my preface, I gave examples in our zoning code of the types of land uses that are subject to conditional use approval. And they are quite of a category. They're very similar to this particular provision, and they are by conditional use approval.
And
So,
conditional zoning in general is written in that way, but as I say, it's not, that has not been applied to community solar in most of the other places where it is being implemented. And I know that you guys read into the record at one point, the part from the charter about the agricultural, the master plan for preservation, agriculture and rural open space. So it's probably appropriate at this point to just read in the planning board's recommendation, which did in fact recommend that the ZTA be approved, and stated, I'll quote this here, the board also believes that the limited area recommended for inclusion and potential development of solar collection systems in the AR, 1,800 acres or approximately 2% of the total 93,000 acres of the AR, represents a small enough area of the agricultural reserve to not significantly compromise the master plan for preservation of agricultural and rural open spaces designation of farmland and agriculture as the preferred use of land in the agricultural reserve. So that was one underpinning of the planning board's recommendation, which is in the legislative note that's in the Google file,
correct.
with
correct.
the overall recommendation that the ZTA be approved.
Right,
They
so
also,
that-
interestingly, yeah, They made a couple
Sorry,
of
I'm-
recommendations, which we've actually taken into consideration. Specifically that the ground underneath the panels have pollinator-friendly plants or are suitable for grazing of crop production. That's one that we're discussing now. And I think we feel good about that. Soil and tree removal is minimized, and the limitation be placed on the amount of agricultural land that can be developed as a solar collection system. And that's where the 2 megawatt limit comes in. But those were their recommendations. But they're
Right,
correct, yeah.
and those are recommendations. They are not, however, ones that are universally supported. And you're hearing from and have heard from the agricultural stakeholders and the preservation stakeholders who take issue with that recommendation in terms of how, first of all, what we don't know in terms of the effect on the agricultural reserve,
Sure.
but what we do know in terms of whether or not it truly conforms with the master plan. So that is a difference of opinion upon which we would not certainly base the final determination here.
Right, but the planning board does have a role in this, and so I think their opinion.
They have an advisory role only. They're not the decision makers. Obviously, the council will be the decision makers, but theirs is an advisory role, and the council has certainly historically taken their own route depending on what they are trying to achieve. So
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
under the category of duly noted.
Well, yeah, and I'm just essentially going on record as saying that I think that the proposal for this to be a conditional use adds a huge amount of process and substantial actually expense to both the county and the program. And it's not the general practice in Maryland where the community solar program is being implemented in other places, which we're actually not doing.
So I hear you there, Al, in terms of the perception that this adds to the process. I would argue that our amendments are giving something to the proponents and the industry. Remember where we started. We started with agriculture being adamantly opposed to moving forward with this ZTA at all, and a number of people being in that camp. We are trying to figure out how to advance this in a way that isn't a cookie cutter approach, acting as if every facility will have the same effect no matter where it is in the reserve. One would argue that the conditional use process properly applied will make sure that we advance solar, but we do it without detriment to the reserve. And I would think that we all want that to happen. So that's where we're coming from.
Right, and I think that on our side, we have also approached this and already made some compromises and are willing to discuss additional ones. And so, yeah, I understand. So there's a little give and take on both sides. This one, though, I think actually would generate an obstacle and an additional level of process and cost that is not needed and is not useful, has not proven useful in other places. I think the program can develop and be implemented. We've put a lot of conditions into the ZTA and we're talking about putting more in. And so in a sense, you have condition. We've established a lot of conditionality. It's not just a vague general rule.
But those conditions do not take into account, they don't factor in the differences in the locations and their effects in the various locations in the reserve. Again, it's a cookie cutter approach. Buffer to house, all of those basic conditions do not obviate the need to look at the effect of a facility in this location that it is in. And I would say, when you say that conditional use process doesn't really help, or whatever you just said, I would argue that properly applied in Montgomery County, the conditional use process has worked. And it does make sure that both the applicant and the community in which it's being located have their opportunity to present and be heard. And if there is an issue with the conditional use process, then I think that that's a correction of process and not a turning away from a process that is part of our zoning code toolbox. I don't think we should say it's hard, so we don't want to do it.
Yeah, looks like
Franny.
Franny wants to talk, and let me just say that having worked with community solar in many other places, there is generally a public discussion process that's inherent to that process anyway. So we're talking about an additional process in a different forum, in a different venue that, just again adds layers and time and cost, including to the county. But Franny, can you talk about that?
Sure. I guess I would like to say, the current ZTA 1801 to Ordinance 1843 defines the parameters by which solar projects are allowed currently in zones as a limited use. That, there are parameters that they must follow. So perhaps we can consider that as maybe a compromise, because you're absolutely right, Al. The limited use process, again, the site development plan approval process, of which Montgomery County requires for these projects. There is a public hearing for which the community, we hold a community meeting. And then there is, in addition to the community meeting, there is also a public hearing at which people can speak. So there is opportunity to provide the county with input as the project is going through the permitting process.
Jeff, would you be able to talk a little bit about the public hearing at the site plan process that's currently in the book?
I mean, one of the things going to a conditional use would do is change who's got jurisdiction. Under a site plan process, it's the planning board that makes the final decision on the site plan. There is an advertised public hearing. The public can speak on how it fits in, its compatibility, all of the findings that you have to make for a site plan. If you go to a conditional use, yeah, there are fees, there are other drawings that may or may not be necessary depending upon the situation and the surrounding to it, and it would add time to it. But it's an additional process. It is used on other uses, both in the ag reserve and not in the ag reserve.
Therefore, we'd get you to a place where everyone in the community was comfortable with the installation of that project.
Well, I would ask, why do we have conditional use approval for the items, for example, that I listed that were not accessory to farming at all, if somehow this is an unnecessary step? Clearly, for things that are not agricultural in nature, the list that I provided, we currently have a conditional use requirement. They are in that category. And there's a reason why, because their effect is different depending on where they are. Why, Jeff, would that not be applicable to these facilities also, which are not agricultural?
Most of the others, I could go through the list, but they have traffic effects. They have drawing more activities ongoing in its general operation than solar that you do and leave.
Passive,
On truck coming back and forth, there isn't that kind of disruption.
Well, so broadcast towers, above ground pipelines, public utility structures generate traffic and so forth. I mean, that's all in the same category. So I'm
Right, I thought you were citing the industrial uses that you thought these were
I
compatible.
was citing the conditional use items that require conditional use approval in the AR, of which those are, and I would agree, yes, a veterinary clinic has more traffic than a utility or a broadcast tower, but broadcast towers and utility structures and pipelines and so forth are items that are very similar in nature in terms of, activity to a solar field.
The other thing
Leslie
here.
and Doug, could
Wait
some of the
a
rest
minute,
of us get in
let's
on
let Doug Boucher say something, please, Randy. I'm sorry to cut you
Sure.
off. He's had his hand up for quite a while.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the basis of this is the misunderstanding that somehow what is being proposed is not accessory to agriculture. And I find that really very surprising. I mean, first of all, 2 of the 3 possibilities actually include agriculture as part of the solar project. That's solar grazing and agrivoltaics. I mean, there's agriculture going on exactly the same land at the same time. So there, the nexus to agriculture, it seems to me, can't be stronger. The third one, pollinator-friendly vegetation, is clearly beneficial to agriculture. It reduces erosion, it reduces sedimentation, it increases the yield of crops that need pollinators, and it helps maintain the biodiversity, which is important for controlling pests and diseases for agriculture, both on the site and on adjacent farms. So this is clearly something that is accessory to agriculture. And there's no justification for saying we need to regulate it or establish more obstacles to its forward progress that have been proposed. And certainly this one, in terms of extra time, extra money, extra obstacles, and uncertainty as to whether it's going to be possible, is a set of additional obstacles.
I would disagree that this is a question of obstacles. I would suggest strongly that this is a question of conformance with a standing master plan and a use that is similar to those other uses that, regardless of whether a broadcast tower has pollinator plants around it or a pipeline has grazing around it, it is still a commercial utility use that is not farming. You can put flowers around it, you can allow a sheep to run around it, but it is not in and of itself farming. And in fact, it excises land more often than not from actual commercial.
It's accessory to farming.
No, it excises, not accessory. It is not accessory to a farm. It isn't. Accessory to a farm is is a farmer choosing to produce up to 200% of energy as part of their farming operation. Leasing to a commercial solar company to take up acreage for these facilities is as a limited or it becomes a primary use of that acreage. You can
Absolutely. It's a primary. There's not a farm in Montgomery County that needs 2 megawatts of electricity.
Oh,
right.
absolutely.
As an accessory.
But I mean, you can put those nice things around it, but it is still a commercial industrial use that is not in and of itself farming. And it needs a look-see. I am sorry that everyone perceives the conditional use process as onerous and in a negative light, but it has served its function more often than not in this county. And if there's something wrong with it, as I've suggested before, it needs to be fixed, but you don't throw it out. It's a process that has value. And I would think that the industry, its cost is not insurmountable. If properly administered, it is just simply one of the steps that will be required to put a non-agricultural commercial utility use in a master planned agricultural reserve. And with that, I'll leave it.
Doug B.
Yeah, we've spent quite a bit of time on this, and I think we're repeating ourselves. Could we please move to a vote on this one? We have quite a few more to deal with.
Yes, thank you.
Randy had something he wanted to add, though.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Randy.
Go ahead. I'm fine. I'm with Frank. It's fine.
All those in favor, I think everybody's picture's up real good now, so we can do a hand vote, I think. Please, those in favor of this amendment, please raise your hand. Okay.
That was 2 hands, Lauren.
All those opposed, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. I don't see Doug, but I'm gonna make an executive decision that he's probably opposed to this. So I think we've got a 4 to 4.
I am opposed.
Thank you, Doug. I can hear you. Okay, so let's move to the next one. Lauren, let's see if we can get through this one a little better.
Well, the problem is that we are agreeing to all of these things because we believe that they need to be this, we need that conditional use to protect
Okay.
the ag reserve to remain agricultural primarily. And it's hard to, this is maybe why maybe it wasn't a good idea to say, let's vote on them one at a time.
And you may be correct, Lauren. Maybe we just,
May I offer some help here?
sure.
So, I mean, I think that there's value in continuing in these conversations, but if all of the rest of the amendments are based off of the conditional use, and we're obviously at a standstill on this, it sounds to me, based off of the back and forth, that there are some serious considerations that you want to be tied to it. And we did have a friendly amendment from Franny on including limited use, but maybe there's extra components that we can add in specifically to that limited use that would make this group more comfortable. So I'm thinking specifically tying it to the master plan. So the limited use could actually be tied to the master plan. And I'm doing this in live form, which is not the best idea in any way, shape, or form, but that's just a thought that came out as an idea. Maybe that's something that we can kind of move forward so we can get through the rest of your list, Lauren.
I'm trying to understand, and Leslie, thank you. I so appreciate your trying to find, a happy place here, but I'm trying to understand, because as I understood the ZTA in the first place, it was a limited use. Is that not correct? So I'm not sure how that's a friendly amendment. How is that?
It is, but I think the point that Franny was trying to make, and Franny, you can kill me for speaking for you or talk over me, is that one of the components associated with that is that there is still public hearings. And so if I'm hearing this all correctly, and I very well may not be, that you guys have significant concerns in the ag reserve that this needs to be tied to the master plan and that there's a lot of community engagement. Since there's apprehension from this side of going to a conditional use, is there a way that we can kind of meld these two things together in order to enhance the limited use in a way that makes you guys more comfortable?
So the limited use, the site development plan approval to comply with the limited use requires both a community meeting as well as a hearing, the planning board hearing.
Right. So the community meeting, as I have experienced it, is just when the applicant comes and says, this is what we plan on doing. So it doesn't really affect the project at all. It's just, here's what we're doing.
If we are to, but you do have to, the planning board will ask you in your application, in the letter that accompanies your application, you have to expand on the community meeting and what the public response was. So that is taken into consideration.
What is the two industries represented, Leslie and Frank? What is your opposition to conditional use?
It does, as Jeffrey explained, there is a kind of another level of timing with regard to the time that it takes to get through a conditional use and different fees and applications that seem kind of, and I'm going to use the word overkill, but that's probably not the right word, for a very passive use that solar is. As he mentioned, we're not going to have traffic. We don't, there's not going to be a lot of in and out traffic from a solar site. It just doesn't get the what's the word I want to use? It doesn't get the amount of use that a more commercial type use would use that a conditional use is applied to.
I would just like to say one real quick thing, and I know there's enough talking without me talking, but as a lifelong farmer, I've looked at this thing since I saw it first, and I've tried to think about it with an open mind, but I really cannot think of a condition that this size solar system is an accessory to my farm. And I've got a fairly good sized farm, but I can't use that electricity. So how is it an accessory to that farm? So I'm sorry to be one that's hung up on that, but I just can't see that as an accessory use. And I've fought many times for different accessory uses in this county. And I think we've done some good things there, but this is hard for me as a property owner because I believe in property rights. But I can't bring myself to think that this is an accessory use to my farm or anybody else's. And that's kind of where I'm stuck.
If
Yes,
I
Karen.
may, so Franny indicating that the public is already being heard in the process that would be associated with this as a limited use. You're talking about the public going before the very board that has already indicated that it favors the use in the reserve, as opposed to the public going before an impartial hearing examiner process, in that process it's quasi-judicial, which is there's a certain impartiality involved in that in terms of determining whether the project in its configuration and how it's relating to, the natural resources at the site, et cetera, is a fit as opposed to a conflict with again, the provisions of the master plan. I would like to think that the industry would want to fit into the community as best it might and not have the conflict that may result, as among other things, in terms of potential litigation as to whether the ZTA is in conformance with the master plan at all, which is at issue. There is a real question as to whether the ZTA as configured without a conditional use provision would indeed be in conflict with or non-conformance with the standing master plan. And that's at the state level in terms of the 2009 Smart and Sustainable Growth Act. So in terms of time, moving forward and providing this use through conditional use seems to me would take less time than potential litigation. And I'm sorry for saber rattling, but that is an issue. It is at issue. We're trying to figure out how to make this conform with the master plan. Conditional use with those other uses that I've stated, including towers and pipelines that are also passive, that don't have traffic, have required the conditional use process. So if timing is part of it, that should be factored in decision making.
And that is really crucial, is it, that what Caroline just said is that this is a way, by using the conditional use pathway, you then, when you get a green light, no one is able to then come and say, you are breaking the master plan of this community, because the conditional use allows you to do that here, even though the master plan is designed to keep
So
projects out.
I would just like to say that we voted on this, and at this point it has failed, but Doug Boucher has his hand up. And would you like to say something else?
Well, that was the point I was going to make. We voted on it. It's failed. Franny proposed what she thought was a friendly amendment, and I think it was too, but the proponents of the original amendment said they didn't consider it acceptable, so it's not it doesn't go forward. So can we please go on to the next amendment?
I,
Laura
Yeah.
wants to have
Leslie,
the entire rest of this discussed and voted on as one.
So-
May I ask, are the rest of your amendments completely tied to the conditional use, Lauren?
Well, I feel like we need to go back and, look at them all collectively.
Okay,
We're not going to get that.
would,
If you feel like you're prepared to risk, basically going against the legislation of the county to do this.
so would you all be willing to have some sidebar conversations, try to figure out a way forward so we can rediscuss the rest of your amendments if we can find a resolution on that, since it doesn't seem like we're going to figure it out on today's working group.
So can I just be clear? So essentially we're being told that if we don't agree to the conditional use amendment, that there will be a lawsuit against the county.
No, that's not.
sort of what it sounded like.
Al, what
Yeah.
we're saying is that what is done with the zoning text amendment should comply with the law, that there are ways in which to get it to comply with the law. And we would hope that the industry and proponents would understand that that is the course of least resistance. I have said, this is the first time I've said that there is a recourse for those that believe that whatever is moved forward is in non-conformance with a standing master plan, presenting great challenge to the conduct of agriculture, among other things, that they have at their disposal an opportunity to bring it before the courts. I wasn't trying to be saying we're going to sue anyone at this point. I'm suggesting that if we want to work within the realm of law, we should look at what the best pathway to do that, because after all, this is zoning code, and that is something that should operate within the realm of law and good public policy.
Yeah, and I'm having a little bit of a flashback to another circumstance that we're all experiencing, in which, some parties didn't like the outcome and they just want to see a different outcome. The fact that some folks don't like the decision of the planning board seems to imply that they think that it's biased. And when we actually trust them to implement all of the zoning and other planning activities in the county, but it sounds like if you didn't get the answer you want there, you go someplace else. That sounds really like what we're dealing with at a national level right now, and it makes me really uncomfortable.
Al, if I can, first of all, Al,
At all. Go ahead, Randy.
I don't know whether we're questioning the planning board or not questioning them. I have personally before, but even your example that you cited a few minutes ago, the 93,000 acres and 2%, none of that adds up, and the planning board was using that.
I just quoted that. That's the planning board. I was reading from the planning board.
Correct, but when you talk about us not trusting the planning board, right there, that creates mistrust. Because 2% of 93,000 is not 1,800, which is what's being proposed here.
Well, separately, Dal, I think I would be disturbed that if in Montgomery County, citizenry didn't have a right or recourse to question the decision-making of any governmental body. That's not the US of A. I don't mean to get patriotic here, but we should have recourse to question if we have problems with decision-making. That's exactly what we should do. And certainly I've petitioned for reconsideration before the planning board when I felt or others felt that their decision-making was flawed. Let's not forget the fact that during this deliberation at the planning board, the planning chair suggested that these facilities would be well suited in wetlands. Well, golly, I would hope most of us would agree that putting a solar array in a wetland is not a good idea. So pardon us if we do take issue with the decision-making at the planning board and are moving forward with our recommendations, notwithstanding what they said.
The other thing is I can't help believe that our esteemed council, we've got 2 representatives on here this evening. I can't help to believe that they wouldn't want to avoid a negativity like this if this is to go forward. So, you know, I think it would matter to them.
I mean, Jeff, I mean, maybe you could just make it clear. It's my understanding that it's up to the council, not the planning board.
Are you talking
That's why
about
we're-
what I said?
No.
The ZTA is up to the council, not the planning board. Once you approve the ZTA, it's to whomever the council has given authority to act on. If it's a conditional use, it goes to the hearing examiner. If it's a site plan, it's solely within the purview of the planning board.
So site plan review is built into the ZTA right now. So if it were passed, the planning board would be the group that's required to review projects based on the criteria in the site plan review. Right. But
Okay, folks, I think, Leslie, help me with this if you want to chime in, but I think we probably need to move to the next item.
Can we move to the next item?
I think that I think ours is done.
I guess my question is there a willingness to continue the conversation if we don't have a
Sure,
line?
we have places of agreement that we can talk about. One of the items on our list is the strong support for solar up to 200% of the farm's needs. That's one that I think we all agree on. Right? I think that where we are right now, and I want to be clear, we tried to front end all of this by keeping prime and productive farm soils out of the mix. The industry and proponents came back and said, no, we got to put this on your productive soils, but don't worry, it's only 2%. We're talking about an effect on the agricultural reserve and farming, and this is why we proposed, and I don't want to go into it again, but that's why we proposed what we proposed so far, is to try to figure out how to accommodate this in some way, shape, or form. So we, if we want to go to other people's amendments, I think it's appropriate to hear them because we should all be heard, but we're trying to find a pathway forward here. I can't make that any more clear. There's a way to advance solar here that will not upend a nationally lauded master plan and the industry of agriculture. And that's what we're trying to tell you. And we're hoping, whether it's during this work session or thereafter, that you will hear us. That's what we're trying to tell you, that this is how this can be advanced without deleterious effect.
Caroline, could I just ask though, you gave some examples of circumstances that would, in the conditional review, mitigate against approval. But you said in general, a plain vanilla solar project wouldn't, but if it was in a historic viewshed or next to an agritourism site or something. And so if those are the main things that a conditional review would do, then but most solar projects aren't those things. There aren't that many of those places actually in the ag reserve. So most projects wouldn't, as you're describing it, be ruled against in this conditional review.
Correct.
So that doesn't deal with the larger issue that you're raising about
It does.
solar in the ag
It
reserve.
does, because it's put it in, understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about putting this in a classification of a use that is not a primary use. It is a conditional use. It doesn't change or conflict with the master plan. The master plan and the zoning that supports it contemplate a set of uses that clearly are neither open space nor agriculture. They are commercial or industrial in nature, but they have a process. Let me give you very quickly an example, and I hope this helps. Landscape, professional landscape, commercial landscaping is allowed by conditional use in the reserve. Landscaping operations are not farming, but they have anticipated that there might be some way to fit them in. Most landscaping companies will be able to adhere to buffers and all the things that are necessary to keep them from being, let's just say, up someone's nose. An important case that was decided at the Court of Appeals was the Melody Butler landscaping case in the reserve on Peachtree Road. Landscaping business, you'd think it'd be okay. Well, they wanted their ingress and egress to be right 30 feet from the neighbor's door. The appeals court determined that this was a non-inherent effect of that landscaping operation and denied it. Now, is that going to happen every time somebody applies for a solar facility? No. But should it receive that scrutiny? Absolutely. It is a non-agricultural use that should be subject to that kind of process, not the rubber stamp, pardon me for saying so, that it will get through the process at the already favorable planning board for this. And this is how we, in terms of the classification under zoning, this is how we keep this use as it should be regarded, which is not agriculture, not accessory to agriculture, but another type of use that we're contemplating allowing in a limited form in the agricultural reserve. I hope that helps.
Yes, Doug B. Doug B.
Yeah, could the chairs clarify for us what is the amendment that is on the floor? And if there is none, as I seem to suspect, I'd like to offer one.
Yes, Doug, please offer up.
Okay, I'd like us to take up the first amendment on the CCSA list. This is a list of 9 amendments. There'll be a lot of agreement, perhaps unanimous agreement. The first one is to add the reference to Comar 20.62 to line 12 in the ZTA. I think Al can speak to the details of this, but I believe we discussed this before and we had broad agreement on it, but we didn't actually move to a vote.
Yeah, I did send around to everybody. I'm sorry it was so long. It's a single document, the long copy of the Maryland Register that includes within it the 10 pages of regulations that define and govern the state's community solar program. And so I understand that the intention of wanting to have the definition that we're talking about circumscribed to the state's program, not just something that calls itself community solar, but to have it be part of the state's community solar program. And that makes sense. I think that's what was always intended, but by adding that reference, you make it quite clear that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the community solar 2 megawatt program with carve-outs for low moderate income, et cetera, et cetera. That's all in those regulations. And so that's where that, simply adding that to the other 2 citations that are on line 12, which refer to the broader net metering law and code. This would make it clear to everybody what we're talking about. I think that it was mostly, I think, folks from the ag preservation side that wanted to see that clarity. So this would just make it clear.
Okay, is that, so is there any discussion on this amendment?
I think we've all agreed that it needs to clarify exactly what Al said. So this is a point of agreement.
let's have a vote then, unless there's further discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I would say that that's a pass. That looks unanimous. Thank you. Now let's move to the next one.
I can present on this one. I think, so there was, when we were going
Yeah.
through
The second one is,
do you want me to take it? So the second
Please,
one
yes.
is the removal of the language that was associated with the PSC. It was in the ZTA. It was recommended to remove it. Since we're writing a report to the council, I think that this group should just make a very strong recommendation that that language stay out.
Is there a second to that amendment, or, I'm sorry, do we have any further discussion on that amendment, I guess?
Agree with Leslie on that.
Yeah, I think so. And I do think that Jeff Zients received a communication from someone that suggested there was additional language, Jeff, that made reference to larger facilities to be approved by the PSC. Can you speak to that? Because I think that should be included in whatever we do here.
Yeah, I mean, what it now says in the code is that if you're over 2 megawatts, you're handled like a public utility land use, which is a conditional use in the code, and that is what is there now. So if you remove this reference that just says we have the zoning code has nothing to do with is preempted, go back and put in the existing text that says if it's over 2 megawatts, it should be handled as a public utility use.
I think what we're trying to say is that we don't want to give the Public Service Commission the notion that we're good with larger than 2 megawatts. So.
Right, and that if you say nothing, they have nothing to go on. At least you'll say this is how you handle it, so you have some standards on how you would handle it.
That's actually the next amendment that I have down. So we want to make sure that we remove all of the language, and then I wanted to put in or suggest that we put in strong language that says the ag reserve is to not allow larger scale projects to come in that are larger than 2 megawatts and should only be controlled by local municipalities. So we can take a both at the same time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Leslie. I think that, whatever is moved forward should make that a distinction. It's a reaffirming statement for the, protection of the reserve from these larger industrial sites. So I would agree with that, and I'll let somebody do a second if they want to.
Al, all those, I think we'll have a vote on this. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Agree with that.
I think that one passes also. Next.
Okay, so the next one on the list is the Savino Amendment, which we discussed on the last call. I'm not as familiar with this one. Al or Doug, do you want to take this one?
You're on mute, Al.
Maybe you should comment. This is the amendment that was already proposed and we discussed a little last time. It basically takes away the vagueness about whether either pollinator or
this amendment was proposed by Dan Savino of Poolsville Green. And
Doug, your audio is not working.
In the essence of moving this along, Al, could you fill us in on this thing, please?
Yeah, basically, it essentially, and I think Tommy read, because they've got all these brackets and things in it, interpreted, or Jeff did. Basically, this says that this must be any project that's in the community solar category would have to be used for farming agricultural purposes by being either pollinator friendly or planted, managed, and maintained and used, that's the addition, for grazing farm animals, or planted, managed, maintained, and used for other agrivoltaic plant materials. So it basically has to be one of those things. And in the subsequent amendment we're going to talk about, there's a proposal about how those things might be done operationally, those different categories. But this simply makes it clear that it's not, you could do it, but you have to do it. That's what it boils down to.
Any discussion?
Jeffrey, am I right on that?
Yes, it just says it has to be used for those purposes, not just maintained for the possibility of those purposes.
Right.
Right. So we're back to if we're giving over, putting solar installations on farmland, then it needs to be farmed, not just planted in flowers. So if we're going to say that that's an easy one, is to put some forbs and some perennial grasses in there and supplant farming. So if we're going to really say that we're farming here, then we should have the grazing and we should have crops, but not just being allowed to put in flowers and perennial grasses. That's taking away farming. And I understand that I'm do this for a living, is I understand the value of pollinator plants, and every farmer here understands the value of that, but growing pollinator plants is not crops, and it's not grazing animals. It's something you have on the side, you have around, maybe around your property, but if you take up farmland, prime farmland with that, then you're taking that out of production. So I'm happy to include the 2 second ones, but not to allow a pass to just underplant with some grasses and flowers. And I'll use an example. In Poolsville, they have the town of Poolsville has a solar installation there. And when they first put it in, they said, we're going to have grazing animals, and they lasted about 2 weeks, and they took them off because they were damaging the panels. And then they said, well, we have a pollinator habitat there. But when you look at it, it's weeds and it's non-native flowers that when I've been over there, there's some Queen Anne's lace, there's some chickweed, and that's not even under the panels. So that's really not an agricultural production. As this questionnaire that came out, the results of just came out, it said, do you support, many Montgomery County residents said, yeah, we support putting solar in, so that with farms, that farms can continue to produce. So let's do it. Let's say we need farming activity there.
So you're proposing a different amendment, essentially,
Well,
amending this amendment.
Just saying we should
No.
include the farming activities as being required.
Wait a minute, Doug, can you speak now? You got your hand up there, but you froze in position.
Oh, no. Well,
Okay.
Yeah, as Al said, Lauren is proposing a different amendment to eliminate pollinator friendly as a possibility. if you want to present that, please do, but that's not what this amendment does.
Right.
This amendment simply changes the rules for solar grazing and agrivoltaics. It doesn't change anything about pollinator
Okay.
friendly habitat.
Oh, well then, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
This
read-
amendment,
so-
I'm
To
sorry,
this
go
spec-
go ahead.
Caroline.
I'm sorry, to this specific amendment, I would say that in our proposed amendments, we were on board with that list, which is not an and list, but an or list, as you may recall, but I'll refer you back to it, with the exclusion type to soils. But that was under the heading of as a conditional use. So in other words, sure, you could do this or that, but it needed to be not occupying productive land, and that it needed to be subject to a conditional use approval. So that puts us in an awkward position. While we in part agree with what you're saying, we do not, out of the context of, in the context of just having this as a limited use and not a conditional use. So that's, if I'm speaking correctly, my folks, if that's where I think we are, which is not where you want us to be. Sorry.
No, that's, yeah, just to clarify, this amendment and this discussion, we actually had some of this discussion, I believe, last session. And in earlier discussions, there was concern that the wording that was in the ZTA, I mean, whatever happens to the ZTA, that's future history. But in terms of what was written in the ZTA, it did not specify that it had to be actively used for one of these things. It listed the three things, but didn't say it had to be actively used for one of these three things. And as I say, coming up, if we can get past this one, or maybe we'll just skip it, Leslie, I think, would describe the proposal we have in terms of how we deal with these different categories. But in any case, all this one did was change tighten the meaning of what was already written in these three categories,
Two categories.
pollinated, grazing, and agrivoltaic, to say that it had to happen rather than it just could happen. And I thought
And
everybody was pretty much.
Yeah, well, appreciate that distinction, but it's still an or list and not an and list. And I think what
Right.
Lauren's suggesting is it's likely that the industry would choose what is the lowest hanging fruit there, which is pollinator plants, which are lovely. But again, it might be occupying prime farm productive farm soil, and it's not farming, and it is not under the process of conditional use approval. But thank you, Al, for making the distinction there.
Yeah. Well, I did put into the file sometime this week, that there was a very nice article actually in the magazine that is from the AgReserve, about the need for pollinators to be, and things that people should be doing to get pollinators back. So yeah, I thought that actually that the sense of being pollinators being useful was pretty strong. But anyway,
They just shouldn't supplant farmland.
So can I put an offer on the table for this specific amendment, and maybe we table this amendment to finish out the conversation, see if we can get an alignment and then come back to it? Okay, great. So the next amendment on the list is solar developers will be required to report all acres to be used for the solar facility, including any acres to adhere to the provisions required in the ZTA for setbacks, etc., in a site development plan required for permitting projects. This shall not include only the acres underneath the panels. Sorry. And shall include all acres included in the fenced or shrubbed area.
Again, I think that's good. I think it makes sure that we're looking at the full footprint or effect of a facility, not just where the arrays are. And I would add that, calculating not only whatever facilities were allowed up to 2 megawatts, but also any other solar installations to that total would be appropriate. So yeah, that, at least in my opinion, that makes good sense.
Okay, any further discussion on this proposal? If not, we'll take a vote. Those in favor of this, raise your hand. I would say that passes.
I just want to highlight that we got a couple things done. So that's exciting.
Right.
That is good.
I'm excited.
Next item, please.
Okay, so this one's long and complicated. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. But the premise of it, and happy to answer questions, is to divide the 1,800 acres and phase it into, phase the programs out. So it's an acreage phase program and an agrivoltaic program. So the 1,800 acres will be divided into 2 separate programs. The first program will be an acreage phase program of 900 total acres to be used for community solar or AgNIM projects, and will be subjected to the provisions currently in the proposed ZTA or the recommendations that we have. I have, with the addition of the Savino Amendment, if approved by the working group. The county should be limited to permitting no more than 50 megawatts of community solar or AgNIM facilities per year until the 900 megawatts are achieved. The second will be 900 acres reserved for the solar facilities for an agrivoltaic pilot program. Community solar, the county shall not permit more than 75 megawatts of agrivoltaic projects per year until the 900 acres are achieved. Any solar facility larger than 2 megawatts will be prohibited from participating and shall not be granted access to the county level pilot or acreage phase program. And then I go into massive amounts of details of how the agrivoltaic program could work. And then there's incentives on how the agrivoltaic program will be self-funded. There's a program evaluation. So the acreage phase program, no later than 5 years after the implementation of the ZTA 2001, the county is directed to do a comprehensive economic analysis of the ZTA, evaluating the economic benefits or consequences of solar installations have on the agricultural community, county residents, and any earmarked expenditures or tax incentives passed in relation to the ZTA. This report should be provided to the PSC to help evaluate the effectiveness of COMAR pilot program and used to inform the development of the community solar permanent program and the AgNIM deployment. The agrivoltaic pilot program, no later than 6 years after the implementation of the ZTA 2001, Montgomery County is directed to do an evaluation looking at the same things, but also looking at the study should evaluate the successful execution of farmer and solar development plans, economic analysis and incentives, so on and so forth. And then after the completion of the study, the county interested stakeholders can evaluate the effectiveness of the program, choose to keep the agrivoltaic program, or release the remaining acres to the other bucket. Additionally to that, the tax resources from the acreage phase program that are received as an association of community solar developments coming in should be earmarked to support any farm-related services to be included, but not limited to rent relief, ag reserve funds, or any other agricultural related services determined by this group and farming community or the Office of Agriculture. Tax resources from the agrivoltaic community solar and AgNIM development should be earmarked for the Office of Agriculture, the Montgomery County Farm Bureau, and the Montgomery County Council for program implementation. I'm going to caveat all of this before I pause to say that I'm definitely open to feedback and interested in your thoughts on this proposal.
Any discussion? Caroline?
Well, first of all, Leslie, thank you for the, gymnastics and drafting all of that, and appreciate what you're trying to do there. It's interesting that we were talking about how complicated and time consuming the conditional use approval process would be. But honestly, looking at the two side by side, I would say that's almost easier than what you just laid out there. That's one thing. Two, and this is in no particular order, with regard to the last item, I'm very hopeful we can identify a date to talk about the revenue stream and how we, what our conditions would be. I don't think we'll be able to get into that. And I think it's a subject that deserves more than a cursory discussion here. So but I think one of my concerns with that work that you just laid out is enforcement and sort of the process by which it's overseen. It sounds intensive. It sounds resource intensive. I very much like the idea of a pilot that will help us to determine how, if and how these facilities can be co-located with agriculture, because in our circumstances here with our farmers, that is a huge unknown and hence their trepidation. But I giving over 900 acres to that out of the gate, even if phased over from years, is it gives me some pause. And like I said, the enforcement aspect of it gives me pause. But I, quite honestly, in fairness, this came as ours did. Ours came late to, during today. Yours came at last night at 6 or whatever. I got to tell you, I need more time to pour over what you've suggested. These are my initial thoughts. And so in fairness, I would suggest that we table this item for us to look more carefully at it and to offer you substantive and thoughtful comments, because you certainly took the time to put that together. So that's just where I am.
So I appreciate that. And yes, it took a lot of time to put together. However, I do generally want the feedback, because I think especially with the pilot program in particular, I think the way that we were kind of thinking about this when putting it together is how do we ensure that the right voices in Montgomery County are being able to have control over the program itself, specifically from the agricultural community working with solar developers and landowners. I don't know if I have the right voices. I want to make sure that you all are telling me that those are the right voices. And then and I'm also not tied to the tax expenditures either, but like, how can you take the resources that are coming in and then self-fund it, and then also plug that into the priorities that the county has. So those are just general ideas. It's definitely not set in stone in any way, shape, or form, but I was hoping that this could be a conversation starter that might be able to get some traction. And I also realized that I skipped over something that's probably pretty important, which is under the acreage phased program, also incentivizing through tax breaks, the development of community solar projects on Class 3 soils. Okay, that's all I got. It's only 3 pages. It's fine. It's fair that you didn't have enough time to read it.
Doug,
I read
Yes.
it several times and didn't, and still have to read it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. It's fair.
and my only comment was, I appreciate all your diligence there, Leslie, but I read way too slow and got it way too late. And if we're going to force a vote on this, I'm might not be given a fair vote. So I agree with Caroline is what I want to say.
May I make
Yeah,
a
I'm
friendly
fine with.
suggestion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could make a friendly suggestion that you discuss the amendment, but don't vote on, or don't ask anyone to vote on it today, but discuss, you can certainly discuss the individual features. Vote on it at the next meeting. If you so wish.
Okay, Leslie?
I don't know who's had their hand up longer. Jennifer.
Jeffrey has his hand up, but he's waving real good.
Just a very fast note, and that is that a number of these aspects are beyond zoning. It would require bills to do. That's all. No, I'm not saying it's.
No, they definitely, they
the
will
idea is,
require
but-
lots. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gone.
Thank you for flagging that. I think that if we
Maybe
do,
clarify that. What is zoning and what could be included in this?
so Jeff, I will need your help on this, but my understanding is that if we were to do this, it would require another piece of legislation to build the structure of the pilot program. And then we would need a tax code for any recommendations, which we would need to probably do regardless of accepting these recommendations or not. But that is the only reason why I knew the answers to what I asked Tommy before, because I asked it already. If that's helpful.
All
Yeah,
right,
that-
any
that would require-
further discussion, Al?
Yeah, and just in that context, for discussion amongst ourselves, we were asked to develop amendments. Clearly, this proposal, as we just discussed, involves more than amendments to the ZTA. It involves some things to do with revenue and taxation, which would be one current of legislation. And then there's a whole description of a program that would be set up and managed and evaluated and so on. And that would be maybe the same piece of legislation as the taxation, or maybe another one. But I would just suggest that we should feel empowered to make broader recommendations than just amendments to the council, that if something like this, we worked on it and were able to come up with something that made sense, but that involves more than just amendments, that we should feel totally empowered to make those recommendations and work with staff and with Jeffrey and others to identify the components that would have to happen to make it work, and not just restrict ourselves.
Lori made that point last week.
Okay, with that in mind, what's the pleasure of the group? Where do we go from here?
Are there pieces of this that we might benefit from using some time to discuss? We only have a little bit, but, or should everybody just go read it?
I have to say, I like where Leslie is going, or whomever is going, with the notion of incentivizing moving off of productive soils. I want to remind the group that we have noted several times that it's not just type 2 soils, but type 2 and 3 where our farms are growing. So incentivizing the facilities to go for 3 to the tune of, what was it, 75% diminishment of taxes. We would have to look pretty closely, and I'm giving it the stink eye right now. But I do appreciate what you're trying to do, which is to get these off of the soils that are producing. And so I would hope when we, if we take this up in any real way, whether it's, again, associated regs or what have you, that would be appropriate. Again, pilot. If it were up to me, if I were the king of the forest, this ZTA would provide for two things. One, the increasing from 120 to 200, and two, a pilot program much more limited in scale than 1,800 acres that allows for a farm to contemplate one of these facilities under certain conditions, and to demonstrate the capabilities or likelihood of farms to be able to co-locate agriculture with solar. I worry about chewing off these big chunks and waiting 6 years to determine the efficacy of that pilot. That a lot can happen in 6 years. One could hope that it's a lot of good, but it certainly could be a lot of damage. So that's another point that I wanted to make.
So the one, and I'm not tied to any of the dates in here. I just want to put a point of clarification on why I specifically tied those dates to it. Is one, it's tied to the community solar pilot program. So I thought, and all of your feedback for sure. But I thought it would be really a wonderful thing for Montgomery County to be able to produce a study that could also be provided to the state to show, hey, this is what was done. This is why this is important. You can influence siting and not just for the ag reserve, but also for the state and this program as a whole. Two, if the ZTA were to pass at lightning speed and get done in January, it's still going to be a 2-year process at the earliest for any solar facilities to be built in the ag reserve. So you're going to need some time for it to be able to do any actual studies of what that really looks like from the beginning until the end. And then with the constraints associated with the agrivoltaics, and not knowing necessarily all of the components associated with whether it's going to be self-funded based off of the Maryland solar market, and then also what Montgomery County can do, working with farmers and going through that extra process, getting those rules, regulations, and legislation passed through. It's going to be an even longer time period before those programs are up and running. So open to what that kind of looks like as far as that program is actually associated, but that's why those dates are chosen the way that they are, if that's helpful in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I would say
didn't
that if I could say something, Montgomery County in the ag reserve, but Montgomery County farmers have been in the forefront of many, many things in not only the state, but in the country. We've got a lot to be proud of. And if there was a place to do a study, Montgomery County farmers are very innovative. If there's any way to make something work, we're very proud of what we've done in the reserve, and that's why we're so protective of it. No-till planning, those kinds of things that are now expanding across the whole country. A lot of that stuff was brought about in Montgomery County and made to work. So
Yeah.
maybe.
I know there have been.
Could I speak on this?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had a couple of power outages and I'm gonna have to turn off my video and just go on audio, which of course makes it hard for you to see when I'm raising my hand. I would just like to suggest, since it looks like we will be continuing this discussion the next time.
Whoops.
Darn it.
We may have lost him.
To the pages, and then separately discuss the amendment on the use of the tax resources. And when we do discuss the use of the tax resources, I have an amendment to that I'd like to propose to give preference to Black and Hispanic farmers, young farmers, and producers of table crops. So if we could just do those separately, when we schedule our next meeting, I think that would be a better way to move forward on both of these issues.
And Leslie and Doug L., I just want to know, are you taking questions for the last 10 minutes? Because we're almost at 8:20.
I am open to that. I was late coming to the meeting, so I better let Leslie speak. And the other thing that we really need to be sure and set that you may have already done is, when is the next meeting?
Yeah.
We did not, but I did prep that there was probably going to be another one.
And any
I'm
meeting
gonna-
you have, you can record it on Zoom, and Tommy can put it up on the Google Drive, because it will not be with Tommy or myself or Jeff. It will be on your own.
Okay, so to be clear, if we have a subsequent meeting on either, I think the dates that were offered, the 28th or 29th, that we'd be meeting on our own, and we could invite the public to be part of it, but you all will not be facilitating. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't know how you would, yes, that's correct. We wouldn't be facilitating. It would be on you to invite, I guess, whoever you would like. But the public will be able
Okay.
to see it if we put it on the Google Drive, which is a very good idea that Tommy came up with.
Well, I think we can probably facilitate a Zoom with our members of this group, and provide a link to the public so that they can feel part of the conversation. So we can do that. It'll be, so to the group, what say you? I'm not sure why, if we're doing this ourselves, that we're hamstrung by the 28th or the 29th. Maybe Tommy or Lori could tell us why those are the only two dates we could.
No, you could do it whenever you want.
Yeah, you can meet on Friday night this week if you want. For cocktails, you could meet Saturday morning. No, I just thought that those days might work since Christmas is next week, and you may benefit from a week off and a little more time to read and think.
Thank you so much. And yeah, Saturday morning sounds really, really wonderful, but no, what it has been articulated to me through others that somehow the drop, and I want to understand, what is the drop dead date of January 13th? What is, can someone explain to me what that is?
That is there is a Fed T&E joint committee scheduled for that day to take up the ZTA again.
If thinking of the sanity of my joint work group members, and the fact that we all have families that we love, and we've been at this pretty hard during a time that there are a lot of other things going on, what would be the harm in our reconvening, for example, on January 4th or 5th, and getting our things together for you well in advance of the 13th? Why do we need to meet proximate to the holidays?
I'd say there's no, if the group feels like they can produce something after that January 4th meeting and before the Fed committee meets, Fed and T&E committee meets, I think that would be fine. It just,
Yeah, I don't want to speak for others on the group, but that would certainly be my preference. I think we all need a little breather time to review what's in the Google Drive and to enjoy our families during the holidays. And I would recommend January 4th or whatever's agreeable to my work group members.
I know that
Perhaps
Stevie
we should,
wanted to stay
float
with
some
whatever
dates.
was agreed on, because Lauren did ask him in an email, and he said, whatever we agreed on at the council, that's the timeline. But it's up to your
you're right.
work group when you want to get it in.
The council did agree to January 1st, but I think that practical purposes, if you want to have an impact at the next committee meeting, you want to get something done before the 13th.
Doug, I think you have to mute yourself because we're hearing feedback.
Who has to
Doug.
mute?
Doug.
No, not L, Doug B.
Okay, the only thing I have to say is the packet that's supposed to give public notice of what the committee's doing is 5 days before the 13th. So it's got to be before that so I can get it into a packet. That's the only restraint I've got.
Why don't we as a group float some dates back and forth via email tomorrow and the next day and iron this date out and get it done?
Sounds good.
Okay,
And Jeff, you said the 5 days before, is that correct?
Yeah, it's the Thursday before the Tuesday meeting.
Okay, we will try not to put you down.
you're gonna have.
And we need to allow some time to actually write up our recommendations.
Right.
So let's discuss this via email, so we're not taking up any more time here, because it would be nice if there's anyone in the public waiting room that has something that they can offer.
I'm looking now to see if any hands are raised. I actually, yes, I do see a hand raised. Let me try to figure out who that is. Okay, Al Worglitz, I'm gonna take you off mute and you can begin.
He's still on mute.
Okay, you can now remove, yes, okay.
Thank you.
Al,
So I'm concerned about the the possible lease price impact on farmers in the ag reserve and what that'll mean for farming. Can our solar industry reps here confirm that the scale or the range of lease price increases is 10 to 20% the previous rate? Is that what you believe the impact's going to be? Is it going to be less than that, or is it going to be more than that?
Thank you. Okay, is there a response from the solar?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you provide some context?
So I've seen a letter suggesting that there's a substantial lease price escalation already going on based on the proposed ETA, and other people are reporting that the likely increase over the previous lease rate per acre is like 10 to 20 times. Can you comment on that? Is that the range you think the solar industry's on land in the ag reserve?
Lori, I can
Jeff,
speak to that
you have
also.
feedback again.
All right, I think I understand the question now. So you're right. I have also heard that people are thinking that solar leases are outpricing what farmers can afford to pay to lease land to farm. Is that the question?
And
Yes,
that's right. And is
yes.
that
Yes, and unfortunately, I really can't, I can't provide any response to that because I don't know what the farmers are leasing the land for. I've not been made, none of that information has been made available to me. So, I mean, I just off the top of my head, I would say probably it's true that solar developers can afford to pay more than a farmer can afford to lease the land. So for the landowner, it looks more attractive, but what those exact numbers comparison is, I can't tell you because I don't know what that lease rate is. So that's all.
And we have one more question, Arjun.
Wait, Laurie, can I just speak to that for a minute? Just for a second. I've actually reached out to the head of the Prince George's County Conservation Soil District. I was actually passed on to him by the Derek Barlage, the head of planning there, with whom I've worked on their solar regulations for Prince George's County. They have been building solar now under their regulations for almost 3 years. And most of it in the community solar projects are virtually mostly on agricultural land. There's one on a landfill. And so I spoke with Steve Darcy, who's the head of the Conservation Soil District in the county there. And he has seen no effect of solar development on land prices, either rental or sale. Their rental prices goes about $100 to $120 an acre for corn and soy, which is, I think, comparable to Montgomery County. But anyway, we're working on getting documentation of that so that we actually have some quantitative information to share with this group. But that was his experience in working with farmers throughout the county there.
Okay, thank you. Let's get in one more question. Arjun.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Very interesting discussion. I have a few comments. There were many comments that National Renewable Energy Lab has said you can put all the solar you need on rooftops. A couple of comments about that. I'm very familiar with the National Renewable Energy Lab reports. They give technical capacity, then there's economic capacity and practical capacity. And the actually implementable capacity is a fraction of technical capacity, much less normally. So that's one thing. The other thing is there are renters, especially low-income renters. They need community solar. Currently, we have a community solar program that's being implemented that offer 20 and 25% discounts to low-income households off of their regular electricity bills that are guaranteed. So community solar is quite independently of economical community solar is extremely important to energy justice. Lots of people, hundreds, thousands
And
of people.
Arjun, can you
Yeah.
wrap up because we're getting close to our end time?
Yeah, and lastly, there is a lot of experience with solar grazing and pollinator friendly. Montgomery County wouldn't be the first to do it. It's not an experiment. I told some of the people on this call, why don't you go up to the American Solar Grazing Association? You can even download a standard contract. So, yeah, so, all right.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Okay, so Doug and Leslie, you want to give some final words and then we're gonna end this Zoom call.
I would just like to say thank you. This was a tough one, and I look forward to the next meeting, and I want everybody to do their homework and come back and continue on. I thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie?
And we'll email back and forth for dates for our next meeting. Thanks so much to both Leslie and Doug and the other members. Thank you also, Tommy and Lori.
And you all have a wonderful
Thank you.
holiday.
Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Really good to
Bye.
have.
Holidays.